Hello, Professor Dede here. Today I'm going to talk about political parties. And political parties have a wide history in our country. And when we think of political parties today, we think of the major two political parties, Democrats and Republicans. A political party, by definition, is an organization of voters with common principles seeking to control the government. This is an important aspect because for Democrats or Republicans to get anything done, they have to control the government. It gives them power to be able to set their agenda, whether it's tax cuts or providing health care. You need to control the government. When it comes to what a political party does, it promotes candidates for office, it does propaganda, it always points out the good things in the party, not the bad things, and they try to offer change and hope and leadership when they're out of power, and try to promote the good things that they're doing when they're in power. Political parties are not mentioned in the Constitution, but in many ways they're as old as the Constitution, as James Madison discussed in Federalist Paper number 10, the fact that factions, and he was referring to political parties, but also interest groups, could easily form down the road, as people would be divided by a variety of different classes and issues. The first two major political parties in our country were the Federalists and Anti-Federalists. The Federalists created the Constitution. They controlled the government. The Anti-Federalists were the ones that opposed the Constitution. They were for smaller government. They were considered more pro-states' rights. Of course, the Federalists controlling the government, Washington was the first president, a Federalist. Adams the second president, a Federalist too. The Anti-Federalists were not doing well election-wise, and in 1800 put a lot of their hopes on a new leader, Thomas Jefferson. One of the first things they did was change the name of the party. They changed it to the Democratic Republicans and started to have a lot of election success. But after a while, the word Democratic Republicans sounded too long, so they dropped the latter half, and that is the birth and foundation of the Democratic Party. Later on, the Federalists, seeking more electoral success, changed their name to the Whigs. This is a known political party that was conservative in Great Britain. The Whigs had some election success. Early on, both political parties, when looking for candidates to run for office, often sought military leaders and generals in order to lead the party ticket to ensure victory. The Whigs, at times, had some election success, but not really long term. In the 1850s, a new political party developed. They stole a name. They called themselves the Republicans. And ironically, when you hear the term GOP, it stands for Grand Old Party. The amazing success about the Republicans is the fact that they won their first presidential election only about 6 years after the party actually was born. In the early days, the political parties focused on one group of voters, white males. And the reason being was this: they were the only people who could vote. Women couldn't vote, ethnic minorities couldn't vote. So what happened was, a lot of the parties, the Democrats, they geared their focus towards the cities in the South, the Republicans towards the North, and in the suburbs, and in the far West. The Republican Party dominance started with Abraham Lincoln, mainly because the Republicans, Lincoln becomes president, the Civil War starts, the Republicans win the Civil War. And for about the next 72 years, the majority of presidential elections were won by the Republican Party. The Republicans at this time, as I mentioned before, dominated in the Northeast, dominated in the West, their weakness in the cities and in the South. It wasn't until 1932 till really things changed to benefit the Democratic Party, the reason for that being the Great Depression that hit our country. Franklin Roosevelt's elected president, and the Democratic Party has a great deal of success for almost the next 40 years, winning almost every single presidential election from 1932 to 1964. They were the party in power. They were the dominant party. They brought a lot of social programs in. They expanded government, and people were happy with what the Democrats did. This is where you get today the division where people talk about the Democratic Party as being big government, the Republican Party focusing on smaller government. In many ways, a lot of the government programs, even going back to the New Deal, the Republicans still say they support. They just want to make them a little bit smaller or have the states deal with a lot of these things. When we think about the parties today, where they get their support, because of all the changes. Today, when you think of the Democrats, it's no longer the South. It's still the cities, but it is also different areas of the country, the Northeast and the far West. At one time, the Republican Party was considered stronger on the environment than the Democrats. But today, the Democratic Party is the home of the environmentalists. Republicans today, Christian conservatives, people in the Deep South who opposed a lot of the government intervention in the civil rights movement, and also a lot of people in the suburbs. Stereotypically, Republicans are considered people who are more financially well off to do. Democrats, people appealing to people who are more middle class. Third parties in our history have not had a great deal of success. Usually what happens is their parties develop because of frustration with the other two major political parties. And then what happens over time is the parties' ideas get hijacked. The Bull Moose Party in 1912 by Teddy Roosevelt. George Wallace's ideas in 1968 hijacked by President Nixon. And in 1992, Ross Perot running as an independent candidate for president. Many of his ideas got hijacked by the Democrats. In that situation, in Nixon's situation, Nixon and Clinton both got reelected, taking ideas from a third party. Third parties usually don't have electoral success, but many of their ideas, going back to the Bull Moose Party of 1912 that supported Social Security and the women's right to vote, later become many times law of the land. A few other things about political parties when it comes to nominating candidates. Parties like candidates when they run for office who are self-funded. They don't have to give them as much money. Also, as we've seen in times, party conventions can be important. When a convention is divided and bitter and doesn't look good on TV, parties usually don't win. When there's a sense of unity and parties being united, that's when the political parties do well in this country. As I said, when it's divided, they usually don't win. When united, everyone getting behind the party, they do well. Open primaries occur when there is a primary where people from both political parties, Democrats and Republicans, can vote. A closed primary is only when, if you're a member of that party, you're allowed to vote in that primary. Parties like it this way, that way there's no mischief going on. Democrats and Republicans do a lot to try to recruit candidates to run for office. As I mentioned before, they like self-finance candidates, candidates that are already wealthy who will support their cause. They also like candidates who are known in the community for higher Q ratings as far as people being known in the community. Local and state governments also play a major role when it comes to parties. Many of the people who start out in politics run for local office, whether it's councilmen, whether it's for the state legislature, or a variety of other smaller offices. In many ways, it's a farm team for later national offices for people to run in. Last thing I want to mention about parties is an important element. It's called patronage. And this doesn't go on in the federal level as much, but on the state and local level, patronage is important. It's when parties can provide jobs to people. And you may say, well, what's the big deal? Well, think of it this way. If the only reason you got your job today is because the Democrats took control of office, or Republicans did, you're going to work like hell to make sure they get reelected so you can keep your job. Patronage. It's a beautiful thing, and it keeps people in control. In my past political career, I got a job strictly because of patronage, and I was grateful for the job because I needed it at the time. Last thing I want to talk about is something that has happened over the last 20 to 30 years in politics, and that's ticket splitting. That's when people vote for Democrats on some issues and Republicans on some issues on election day, splitting the ticket. In the old days, a lot of people would vote straight tickets for both parties. Now people mix things up a little bit and vote for people of different parties. Voting's important. I always tell people, if you don't vote, don't bitch about the government you get. And sometimes when you think about third parties in voting, I talked about Ross Perot, but think about the effect Ralph Nader in 2000 and Jill Stein in 2016 had with people voting for them instead of the major party candidates of Al Gore and Hillary Clinton. Voting is important, and remember, whenever election days come up, it's your chance to voice your concerns and thoughts on democracy. Most importantly of all, take care. Have a great day.